It will take nothing short of 100 proof living to restore lives. Join a conversation between a cop and a criminal with Brian Yates, Chris Pridmore, and featuring Caitlin Meath, working to inspire and motivate others, rebuilding the communication breakdown. This is the 100 Proof Living Podcast.
Well, welcome back to Conversations with a Cop and a Criminal. I'm Brian Yates.
And I'm Caitlin Meath.
And I'm Chris Pridmore, and today we got another good show. We got two guests with us today, Sarah Boyce and Kevin Lightfoote, and a paramedic and nurse, and they're married, which is kind of a cool combination, so I'm pretty excited about bringing them in. It should be a fun interview. But we just want to kick off the show today with a couple things like we do every episode. And I'm going to Austin, Texas in 2 weeks to speak with South by Southwest on transforming leadership and trauma in leadership. And I've mentioned it a couple times through social media and on the show, I think, a little bit. And I'm super excited about this because it's an hour-long panel that I'll be participating on with 3 other people, but we've had some trial runs in it, and it really is about changing the game from a leadership perspective and recognizing that no matter where we are in life, no matter what level you're in life, stuff can go horribly wrong and change how you behave. And leadership positions, a lot of times, it can impact your organization and the lives of others as well. And sometimes those traumatic events may have happened years prior. It may not even something that happened in your time at that organization, but it might be affecting your ability to lead. And so we're going to address that right in the face of some live audience and live questions. And I'm pretty excited about it. We all come from different perspectives. And I'm pretty excited about the opportunity to speak at South by Southwest. So that's on the 15th, and I'll keep you guys informed of what comes from it. Second thing I want to talk about is I do some work on Wednesday nights at a homeless shelter for veterans. It's called Eagle Star Housing. And I've had some of the most powerful moments in my recovery and work with just individual conversations with people that have come into that housing development. And it is the lowest level of substance use requirements, so people can be actively using. They just can't use on the property. But you run into varying types of situations, but every single person that comes in there was just off the streets. And there's one gentleman there that I've been working with for a couple months actually. And when I first met him, he'd been 14 days without a shower, distraught, broken. We were going through the holidays. His family had rejected him, but his backstory was a highly successful businessman, and he had lost his career, all of his construction company and everything else, to gambling. Fast forward, he went through the holidays. Family wasn't going to have him around. He gets through Christmas, and they start letting him around. After the new year, he's now seeing his grandkids, seeing his family in other cities all the time, like on a routine basis, and become an active part of his life. And the shirt I'm going to show here, in April, he's starting his shirt. I'm going to show the whole thing because he didn't want me to show the name yet, but he's an Irishman, obviously. In April, his daughter helped him start his own business again. So he's back in construction. So here we are 6 months later after man was homeless, thought he had no relationship with his family, and he, through work, has actually got a new life and a new stage doing the skills at 66 years old. He's about found a way to recover his life. I love that story because it shows that no matter where you are or what point you're in, work can be done to have a better day. And regardless of what your history is, and for him, he's just been unbelievably inspirational. When he handed me that shirt, it was a not proud moment. I kind of fell apart a little bit because it was just beautiful to see this man come from where he came from. So I wanted to share that. We do some other work there. We talked a lot about markers this week, those moments when life doesn't seem like it's progressing. You're just sitting still. You still have to set markers to feel like you're making progress, to keep motivating. We were referring to an expedition that was stranded on the ice, and they were stranded for 2 years. The way they stayed motivated, they couldn't really move. I mean, there was nothing to do but stay there and try to survive. And how do you stay motivated with that? Well, they did it through work. They had projects that had to be done each day and set markers each day to show progress until they eventually could move forward and get free. And they all survived. So we were talking about the importance of markers. And that's kind of the things we do at Eagle Star. And it is a product of the show and some of the things we talk about. But I wanted to kick off the show today with that and just recognizing that we're all kind of in this together. You know, and it's just been really hitting home with me recently that no matter where you are in this life, we probably have stuff we're dealing with, and we can all make a difference in our own lives, which ultimately turns into impacting other people's lives. So, Brian, you had some things that you wanted to share.
Yeah, so just real quickly on South by Southwest, I'm excited for you on that. Can you talk a little bit about what you anticipate the audience looking like? Like who would typically attend that, and who are you kind of hoping specifically attends your session?
Right now, there's about 380 people in our session. It's a broad spectrum of everything from movie producers to musicians to it's a heavy entertainment show event. Right. So you name it, the who's who is kind of there, which has been pretty exciting. But I think the audience is heavily geared towards leadership, it looks like. In all kinds of organizations, mental health organizations on up through movie production, like I said. There's even some healthcare organizations there. So my hope is just to use my story and my history to say, I don't mind telling it and let them know that don't get cocky in your position you're in, because you could be sleeping in a cemetery on your 44th birthday. It can happen. It did. So address these things. Also recognize that when you're in a leadership position, you're impacting the lives of many, many people. Own what's going on, address it, and move forward. So my hope is that people at least start thinking about the possibility of dealing with things they know to be true in their life.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. And that's actually kind of a good segue. So I recently connected with a local candidate for sheriff here in Iowa, and have been starting some dialogue with him. And then, in the corporate environment, and Chris, as you and I and Caitlin have spoken before about really trying to connect with leadership, because there's so many different sectors and industries. Law enforcement's one of them, where there becomes this culture of behavior. And even if people recognize there's problems with that behavior, they're not going to be, the leader to change it all. There's strength in numbers kind of thing. So nobody wants to speak out. And, specifically in law enforcement, there's a rising suicide rate. There's and not just law enforcement, but now it's impacting other first responders. There's still an undertow of an abuse culture within law enforcement, from alcohol and drug abuse to domestic abuse and these other things, where people in that role feel like they're supposed to be Superman. And so if they struggle at something with something at home, and it doesn't even have to necessarily be a behavior of their own, maybe it's they've lost a family member or something else catastrophic has happened to them rather than their behavior, they don't want to step up and ask for help, because they're the one that's supposed to show up on scene wearing a cape. And within the ranks of that thin blue line, it's difficult for people to want to reach out. When I went through one of the academies that I went through, we were told by a psychologist that it takes 72 hours to psychologically decompress from an active 10-hour shift. Well, when you're working 4 10s in a row, you never get the time to decompress. And so working with leadership, kind of what you're talking about, with leaders having to own the behavior and the patterns of their people, we're trying to help law enforcement leadership understand that it can't just be a 15-minute in-processing briefing where you say, hey, we've got this 800 number. If you ever have any problems, reach out to them. After critical incidents, there needs to be some psychological debriefing, and not just sitting on a couch. On a regular basis, people need to get checked. Not for anything that they're doing wrong, but for things that have happened to them. These psychological injuries that happen, and PTSD is a real thing. You see it in the medical field. You see it certainly with firefighters and paramedics, and you see it in law enforcement. So having some of these conversations very quickly within law enforcement, people kind of light up, because whether it's, again, a substance abuse problem that they've hidden, or some type of resounding message in their head of pain that they're feeling, they really don't feel like they're able to reach out. And so it's going to take leadership from the top down to start demonstrating ways that we can more effectively help one another. And it's going to, takes a long time to turn a big ship. But having those conversations has been encouraging, because I think as these problems rise to the top, people are recognizing we can't just ignore this. It's not good for our own law enforcement community, but it's also not good for the external community. And with all the social media and press going on with this perceived conflict between law enforcement and the rest of our culture, we're not doing ourselves any good by putting ourselves in silos and acting like there's nothing that can be done about it. So anyway, that's just kind of an update on my end. I referenced a book with you guys the other day that is really good, called Who Moved My Cheese? And just a quick summary of it, you can actually go to YouTube and watch a cartoon of it, but literally it's 2 mice that go through a maze every day to get to the cheese. And one day they go through the maze like they normally do, and they get there and the cheese isn't there. One of them very quickly realizes, well, it's got to be somewhere else. So they adapt, they find a new path, and they ultimately, that one goes and finds the cheese. But the other one just kind of gets indignant and just starts, getting angry. Who moved my cheese? He says over and over. And then ultimately he stays in the same place because that's what he's always done. And so eventually the cheese will just show up. The lessons are obvious, but it's a good visual to kind of help understand how we get in these ruts as organizations, as large corporations, as an entire community of first responders, military veterans, whoever. And it's this idea of adapting. And so law enforcement now is going through a major cultural shift, trying to adapt to the shift that's already happened in our society. But it's showing that willingness. And Caitlin always talks about this. And it's that idea that you have to be willing to make a change. And that's only going to come when you recognize the need for a change. That happens in our lives personally, but then it also happens systemically. So those are kind of the updates on the LEO side. And I'm excited to hear that these people are now campaigning on positions of addressing mental illness and substance abuse and suicide problems in our community. People are running, sheriff platforms are running on that now versus just, how do you manage the budget for a jail? It's really trying to make a positive impact in the community. And so I think for that, we need to highlight that and embrace that understanding that there are leaders out there that are really trying to make an impact. So, Caitlin, you want to give us the updates on your end?
Absolutely. I was just thinking that I love how you two go first because that's how my wheels start turning, and I just sit here and shake my head, and I'm like, yes. You talk about adapting and adjusting, and that's something that's been really real and prevalent in my life lately. And as a peer advocate, I have like that protectiveness of peers and like our Cody team that is actually out in community. So these are people with lived experience that have their own traumas, their own past, and maybe they haven't gone through a process of healing or they're in the middle of it. And then, boom, they're put in a pretty traumatic, tragic situation that just brings up or re-triggers all of those things from their past. And so I guess, you say law enforcement, paramedic, but I definitely think about it from within my community of peers and just being protective of how do we help each other while we're also going through our own grieving, our own healing. So, I talk about being a peer advocate at Connections Rounded Recovery, which is the recovery portion of, there's treatment, prevention, and we stay in our lane of the healing and wellness. So I wanted to touch on that we do have a vocational career counselor. Her name is Jenny Forward, and also a special projects workforce advisor, Jeff Wise, through Workforce Development. They offer assistance in finding career pathways and educational opportunities for anyone seeking help in this area. So they have a lot of times at the center, many throughout the week, to either meet one-on-one or in a group setting so that people can find whatever their career pathway or educational opportunities are. Resources such as, I wrote them down here so I wouldn't forget, resume examples, setting career goals, work and recovery, interview examples, grants and different programs accessible, and addressing having a record while also seeking employment. Another thing that is pretty exciting for us is through Trillium Health, we are now offering monthly Narcan training. So that's open to anyone in the community. You go for a short, brief training of, how to recognize an overdose, what it looks like, and then how you can properly respond. Folks do leave with a kit and Narcan upon attending that training, but we do recommend going to the training, because we have trained trainers to do such, and that happens usually near the end of every month. We've also implemented Nar-Anon, which is for the family and friends impacted by an individual's substance use disorder. We would like to get Al-Anon at some point, of course. We have NA meetings and AA meetings for those who, live with substance use disorder. But having that, and you talk about the community at large, having that family and friends portion of how do we address this and heal, because it really affects and impacts the entire family. We also have a big book study that's coming up, which is really studying the entire AA big book, led by instructors who are available to do that. So we're excited because that, too, was a community member that was willing to offer her time to do this on a weekly basis. We also have a lot of volunteers. More and more are calling and asking to be helpful, whether it be even just mopping the floors, but just wanting to be a part of the atmosphere that we've cultivated there. Also, I spoke last time, I think it was, on the organization Code Gratitude, which is the link between individuals and whether it be first responders or law enforcement and agency organization, and kind of turning around and making amends, but also recognizing the role that those individuals as first responders played in their journey. So we had, from our center, we had 13 that were sent out. They ranged from, I think, the Rochester Police Department to different counselors. I personally sent mine to the Canandaigua Police Department, who played a critical role in my rehabilitation, and also to Ontario County CPS. So these are the folks that, quote unquote, took my daughter back in 2014, and I had a major resentment toward them for a very long time. I've regained custody of my daughter near the end of last year. So I've gone through the process and the healing motions of that to now actually see that CPS played a major role in me getting well. And I actually thank them. So I do know that those cards were received and sent out. We also have a lot of exciting community-based outreach coming up in the next couple of months, so I'll definitely be sure to stay tuned in with that, including a community forum for law enforcement, a job fair, and just really trying to pull all members of the community together. And then, lastly, I plan to present tomorrow to ATI, which was the Alternatives to Incarceration, out at Farmington Outpatient. So I'll present the center and what peer support is and the Cody team and all of that to them, and just continue to attend drug treatment court staffing on Thursdays, which I really, really enjoy and learn a lot doing that.
Yeah, the last time you mentioned the ATI work that you did, you said there was crickets. Brian, I don't know if we have any suggestions for to get the crickets gone, like a kazoo or something. But
I just come in all smiles, and this is the most exciting thing you're going to hear about in your day, and just hopefully they get on board.
Yeah, no, I just find it interesting that the work you're doing with connections, and the thing that Brian was talking about too, that law enforcement is getting more heavily involved from a positive perspective. It really, I heard your update, you hear Code Gratitude, the coming back full circle to say, look, you helped me, and then to see law enforcement getting involved in the process of helping more proactively. I think the connections brings that unique ability to bring everybody together right there.
Absolutely, and I can say Chief Hedworth especially has been very excited about the work that we're doing and kind of the innovation of that and wanting to be involved. So I definitely commend him for his willingness on that end to also form that gap between those in recovery, the peer community, and the quote-unquote bad guys that it may appear to us. I certainly don't see it that way, and I can speak for, I know, all of my colleagues that we don't view it that way at this point in our journey of recovery. But, Brian, you were the guys in the cars that we detoured from. We avoided at all costs, so...
Well, I think that's actually, let just touch on that for a second, because I think think of the dichotomy there, right? You think of, or there was a time when you thought of any enforcement branch as kind of the bad guys, and you avoided them. And yet at the same time, there were some of those officers that looked at you probably in the same way. But you look at this transformation and how you begin to understand and appreciate the value that they bring. And I would say, and I look at your experience in drug court as probably the most representative of this, where now the government, the bad guys, the law enforcement, they're bringing in other perspectives like yours so that they can be more effective, right? And so I think you're starting to see where you've had a little bit of a transformation where you kind of have an appreciation and a value of those people that are out there doing the enforcement. I think also they are starting to have a value and appreciation for people that are in those circumstances. And there is truly more of, instead of carrying the nightstick and just being out there enforcing the laws, it's this, how do we fix this? And that's the conversation I'm hearing more of, and that's where I'm getting excited about is that is more of a coming together. Let's all get around the table and figure out what can each of us do differently and seek to understand before we're understood, and then maybe communicate some of the things that everyone else could do that would make our job easier. But I just love hearing the conversation. So your updates always get me excited.
Thank you.
He's all pumped up, fired up, motivated.
Here we go.
Heck yeah, let's go.
Let's get it.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks for the update. So we get to the point that I've been pretty excited about. We got Sarah Boyce and Kevin Lightfoote here. Kevin is a paramedic and chief of EMS for, is it Seneca? North Seneca. Yeah. And Sarah Boyce, I work with at a local hospital. It's UR Medicine, FF Thompson Hospital. She was Nurse of the Year and got all these accolades. But I know Sarah, as a peer in the ED, probably within the first week I met you, where I sit is right outside of like room 10, I think it was. And you had walked by me, and there were apparently people that you knew in there. You walked in the room and said, I just hear you making noise in there like you do. And I hear you say, I got a friend here you should talk to. He hasn't done anything for me, but he might be able to help you. Hey, Chris, I got one for you. Yell out the room at me. And that was the start of our wonderful relationship. So there's been a lot of yelling since then. But
nice yelling.
Yeah. But welcome to the show. We're really glad to have you here. Another nuance is that you're married.
Yeah.
So
we met in the ED.
You did.
When Kevin worked at Canandaigua, and I worked nights at the Thompson. So that's how it all started.
Everything. I know you speak very highly of him. This is the first time Kevin and I have had a chance to meet, but she speaks very well of you. I was curious, though, this is kind of a crossover. Brian was talking a lot about some of the issues that go on in law enforcement and this feeling of Superman and the need to decompress. I mean, what are you guys running into? Because you're both unique nuances of that first responder. I'm curious what you're running into. And how do you deal with the decompression?
A lot of people have different ways they deal with it. With the way our rotations go, we just went to a new schedule to give people more time off between shifts, and we're hoping that can help a little bit with that. It wasn't the primary goal of changing things, but lots of people have hobbies outside of it. We have a lot of people who are into cooking and outdoorsy things and all the like. Oddly enough, not a lot of people into like physical fitness and that kind of things, just more kind of comforting, soothing kind of things, whether it's, making big meals for people or, we have people bring in, I had my day off, and then they swing in and they bring in a huge plate of cookies, or they made, loaves of bread and stuff and stop and drop it off. So things like that. But for the most part, there's not really any sort of universal thing that everyone does. It's kind of, everyone has their own thing. It's actually something that's not ever really addressed. It's just something, when you've had conversations like this, that you start to recognize, this person's doing this. This is that's their thing. That's what they do to, kind of deal with what we see on a daily basis.
It's interesting what you just said. You said it's not, you don't really, don't think about it. It's not really addressed. And maybe therein lies the thing, is it's almost like with law enforcement, it's just kind of the norm. You just kind of have to deal with it. You sort of have to suck it up. Right. And I think that we're starting to see that can actually lead to a very tragic end. How homes broken at the very least, and we see suicide rates climb like crazy.
Right. Well, and that was one thing Brian said that I recognized. One of the things, I think he said something about, you're supposed to be Superman coming in with the cape on. Yeah. There's and I'm going to screw up the name, I think it's Project Greenlight or something like that, that's addressing suicide in first responders and stuff like that. One of the biggest things that they've been finding is, especially on the medical side, people don't want to say it's PTSD. That's for people who've been to war and have seen things way worse than this. It's like, no, what I have, that's nothing. What other people have is the real thing. And I think that's led to a failure to recognize it, even within our own industry, that it is a rising problem. So it's nice to see projects like that are starting to bring it around. You see people on their bed day and you're like, no, whatever I feel about it, however I've reacted to this situation, that doesn't matter. It's their thing, not mine. And I think that attitude of trying to push it off as it's nothing. It's expected with the position that a lot of people have kind of just failed to address it overall, industry wide.
In the state of New York, for either of your positions, whether it's getting licensed as a nurse, specifically working in the ER, or working EMS or working for a fire department, do they do personality profiles or do they do psychological profiles?
No.
Mm-hmm.
See, that's one thing in law enforcement that every department tests. They do a psychological assessment. Typically, you take the the MMPI or something, and then you typically will meet with a psychologist to kind of benchmark and make sure you didn't cheat on it somehow. But one of the things I think would be super helpful, and I'd love to hear your input on this, is if everybody that comes into the organization has to go through that, that's a benchmark. Why can't we redo that every 6 months just to say, hey, the person's really slipping in this emotional area, or something's really changed? Because some of those things we learned, and I'm sure I can see it in both of your faces because I've worked with so many. My daughter was an ER nurse, and I obviously brought a lot of people to the ER, so I see it in your faces. But we developed that that kind of, I don't know, hard candy exterior where you don't. You can't get emotionally involved in every case, so you develop a sarcasm, and you develop these things to kind of allow you to answer the next call, right? Because you get souped up wildcat in bed 1, but then you get like someone that had a stroke in bed 2, and you're more mentally or emotionally involved with one and the other, but then you get someone that comes in with a runny nose that wants pills, and you guys deal with so many different things. But it seems like if we benchmark what we're claiming is someone's mental stability and their health and their suitability to do the job, why aren't we going back and rechecking that every so often?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's nothing of that. I've been a nurse for 25 years, and there's never any kind of, no one ever asks questions like that, or, why you want to work in the ER, or why do you want to work in dialysis? Like, you see, the ER and ICUs, you see the worst of the worst. ER is more so, depending, you range from death to birth. It's a wide spectrum.
Yeah. Well, I just think that if we're going to test everyone's cholesterol once a year to be preventative toward heart disease, why wouldn't we do that for emotional issues? And I know there's this stigma out there that just has to be broken, because people, you talked about, PTSD having kind of this stigma, and it does, but so does mental illness. And, someone can have a decline in a certain area that's measurable through tests like that, but might not be detectable when they show up for duty every day. Right. And I think that there could be more proactive things that are done. And I would think the insurance companies would actually want that done, much like they require health screenings before you get your premiums every year.
Right. They do, when they do, after a major event or something, really traumatic happens, they'll do the post briefing and the counseling and stuff like that. But that's only after major bad thing, really bad things, not just bad things, but really bad things. So there's a difference, but you deal death. I can honestly say years ago, I had 4 gunshots and 1 cardiac arrest. And at the end of the night, and I was 6 o'clock in the morning, I'm like, can I stop touching people now? Because clearly I'm not doing the right job. And she's like, you can go sit in the break room. You can seriously just punch out. I'm like, there's some days that you just, you know what I mean? Nothing you do works right. And there's other days that go great.
Even think about that example. Just go sit in the break room. Somehow that's going to let you psychologically decompress from, 4 bodies in the other room.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wait till shift changes and go home.
Yeah. And obviously days I don't deal with that much like that these days, but there's still a lot of things that you still deal with. As far as that, you know what I mean? And it's, and the death stuff is the problem. And then, the overdoses that come in small town, go back to the small town. It's people I know. It's people's grandmas. It's people's, mom and dads. It's kids I went to high school with. It's people I went to high school with, kids. It's so many people. It's sad. The issues.
It really is. Go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say, Sarah, one of the things I noticed with you, working with you, is seeing when the pace changes, you lock in and go. And I'm wondering if that doesn't lead to some kind of bioburden in your brain a little bit that you've become so accustomed to. You're still seeing every bit of the trauma, just at a rate that's making you process it more, so you don't see the reaction of anybody else. When it's slower, people are sitting around and typically a lot more sarcastic. I have the benefit of being able to be in other areas of the hospital. Right. And the ED definitely is the most sarcastic group of people.
That's the way we deal with everything. And people are sad. People are like, oh my God, but that's... that's how you cope with it. You know what I mean? If I cried every time somebody died, or you know what I mean, like I'd cry all day, every day. Like I can't.
But I think with that though, you do sense the humanity there. I mean, it's not like you're a cold person,
Nope.
but it's actually one of the things I respect about you is I see that because I've seen nights, especially on Mondays, when things just start losing their mind, and you're just going around with a computer and running room to room and doing God knows what. But you're staying your course, you're dealing with this stuff, and I think that these are the things that we just blow. You're blowing past it, and I think we blow past it. Kevin, you just touched on it too. You're caregivers. So when you're doing your downtime, what are you doing? You're making food for somebody. You're minimizing that you may have actual PTSD because somebody else has that problem. You don't have that problem. You just got to suck it up and deal with it.
Right.
And I find that curious. And I know Brian's talked to us a little bit about law enforcement, that Superman thing.
Yeah.
At what point do we allow you guys to be able to deal with real things before it becomes a really, really big problem? I'm wondering what actually is being done. Is there anything proactive right now that you're seeing some changes?
I'll be honest.
I think she spoke of the postmortem after a mass casualty event or a horrific car accident or something like that. But it's kind of like we joked earlier, like, oh, just go to the break room or just go home and sleep it off kind of thing. Debriefing me today isn't going to even begin to touch any kind of post-traumatic stress I'm going to have. That's going to unpack over weeks and months. And that's why I think more of a randomized interval of, hey, we're just going to pull this person in today and give them a quick assessment and then kick them back out on the street and let them continue to do things. And then we're going to analyze what we found. I mean, there has to be more care for the caregivers. I mean, if you think of in the ER what it's like, to go from awful mass, trauma and then be expected to go into the next room with an earache and give them, cordial, compassionate care when you don't care, and just all of the range of things that you go through in a given day that it gets compartmentalized, and that's why you get the sarcasm, and that's because you have to do it. And so that's why I wave the flag of first responders, because when it comes, your call comes over the radio, or when she knows something severe is coming to the ER, you just go into mode. But how long can you be in that mode? And how many times can you just flip that switch before it begins to build up? And I don't think we should be asking that of people. So having, spent most of my career in law enforcement and really working along some amazing people in fire and EMS and especially ER, the things that are dealt with, I don't think we should expect that of people, because we don't expect that of anybody else. And I think that this idea of proactively assessing and just, making it a culture shift. And that's why it's leadership down. The leaders have to show we're going to do this together versus, you should pull John in the other room. He doesn't look like he's doing so well. And now you've secluded him. You've made him be the, kind of the bad guy that you're going to pull off the street. That's not the way to deal with it.
Right. Well, and
that's what builds up the barrier.
Yeah, and then the other people see him get pulled off, and then they're like, oh, I don't ever want to be that person, so then they just get better at hiding it, or, oh, I'll sneak around the corner so no one sees what's going on, because they don't want to have that kind of stigma attached to them, too. It's like as the chief, you know how to give the right answers. If someone came up to you after a bad incident, you would know exactly what you need to say to, let them know you're okay, and then, go home and cry in your wife's arms. And that's really the extent of the
EAP.
What's
yes.
available.
Do you want to go to EAP? No. Okay, great.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the end of it. Unless they tell you have to go to EAP, and then
So
I've not been to EAP, just so you know.
Yeah, I can see you're digging in. When she was actually saying that, her heels were literally digging into the floor. That was pretty cool. But so you were starting to say there are some things that are being addressed. I mean, other than just
like I
EAP?
said, it's usually just after major trauma things. You know what I mean? Like like if it's like the death of a baby or something, like, you know what I mean? Which isn't something we see often, especially in a smaller hospital. But still, that everyone. That's the worst. Or if they have a problem upstairs on OB, and it's usually just like one debriefing afterwards, and like that's kind of the end of it. Like,
right?
And like and literally you are expected to get back up and keep working. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'll take 10 minutes, gather your thoughts, and get back to work. Like, that's the gist of it.
Yeah. And the thing is, the intensity of those moments, one of your coworkers, I remember one time he had a situation up on the floor where somebody had coded, and they were doing some work, and there was a conflict between the doctor and the nurse. So you've got not only the death, but then you've got this conflict with your coworker that you got to kind of separate from, too. And, by the way, somebody still needs your help somewhere. And that's the thing that just baffles me how you do it. What I have noticed is that you come together.
Yes,
you come
definitely
together. It seems
teamwork.
like your team seems to be a lot of your support. Do you find that to be true inside and out, or
Absolutely, yes, definitely. It's definitely all about teamwork. You know what I mean? And it's like, and you know who has your back, and you know even the people that you don't get along with the best, they'll still show up to. You know what I mean? They may not be your favorite coworker to work with, but everyone shows up and does their best. And I know as far as like us, like outside of work. Just like, you know, I understand what he does and he gets what I do. So it's very easy to be sounding boards for each other and, you know, cheerleaders. And when you're, you know, very emotional about things, you know, it's good to have someone to feedback with.
Someone who actually understands it, you know,
Right.
so that anybody can say, "Oh, that's too bad. I know how you feel."
that must be a
but
hard
you know,
day.
to have someone that you know
Right.
truly can empathize with where you're at is, I think, it makes a huge difference.
I would think so, because you wouldn't have to go back and explain it all.
Right.
You can just kind of say this
And
happened.
people, when you don't work it, you don't. My friends are like, "That's cool," and you're like, "Nah, it's not. Like, it's not that cool." But you know what I mean. You don't if you don't work in medicine or you don't work in healthcare or you're not a police or you're not fire, like you don't understand being a first responder. Like, you know, like even me riding on an ambulance, I was like, "Ooh, this is great," you know, even though I see just what they see, but I was like, "Ooh, this is so different and cool." But it's, you know, it's a very different ball game for people.
Yeah, the number one question for people outside are, "What's the most messed up thing you've ever seen?"
know.
And I'm
What's-
always like, "You
What's
don't
the
want to
worst
know."
thing you ever saw? Like, you really don't want to know the
They
answer.
think it's going to be something cool out of a Hollywood movie, and it's you know very very
not.
far from that.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. Hey, Chris, and let's maybe bring this full circle, because as much as and I agree with them 100%. I love their story, because very few people, you know, a lot of police officers, I mean, there's some that are married to other police officers, but to be able to go home and just have that, and Chris said it best, you can just yell across the room and say, "Hey, this happened today." Nothing else needs to be said. You get it. You understand the dynamics, the complexity of it. Nobody else understands that. So when someone comes into the ER, they have no appreciation for what you just dealt with in the next room. And when I pull someone over or end up responding to a domestic or, you know, whatever, they have no appreciation for what I've just come from or what has been in my last couple of months. But at the same time, I don't have an appreciation for what they're going through. And I think that's the difficulty. And so I think, and maybe Caitlin can speak to this a little bit, but I think as we're trying to do this kind of collective community connection, we have to get people, that are willing to listen to the stories. And so that's why today is exciting for me, because there's so much similarity in our three stories in terms of just living through the chaos. And there is kind of a sick sense of humor about it, because you know how bad it is and you can't live in that moment. You do just kind of have to move on, and we all get it. Like, we see each other on the street, or we're dropping people off to you, whatever, we're answering the same calls, and we just kind of get it. But we have to be able to reach across the table. So the drug court and the, you know, so many things that, Caitlin, you're doing at Connections, where can we have more dialogue to have these conversations? Because I need, and I want to help in the law enforcement community to develop a real appreciation for restarting every call the same way. You've got to start over and give everyone your full attention. You know, you have to bring a level of appreciation, consistent level of appreciation to every call. I mean, where do you see in your work in the community where some of those conversations are happening, or maybe where they could happen?
So I think because of my unique perspective in having the same issues as all of the people that come through the doors of like Connections or drug court, I'm able to look at their behavior as a symptom of something far deeper. So it's not to give them sort of a pass or to say, you know, okay, you know, pat on the back, you're going to be all right. It actually, and I think drug court was pretty surprised by this. I know the judge actually commented on it. I take a pretty like no consequences. I take a pretty hard stance. And if the same behavior is happening over and over, knowing that type of intervention from an outside source, so to speak, like law enforcement or drug court, that sometimes that is what is necessary for someone to really have that jolt and that wake-up call. But in terms of people just coming through the doors of connections and sharing, like someone just shared with me not too long ago that, she was suicidal, and that's something that I could relate to on a personal level, and that just, affects me in so many ways that it would affect anyone. But recognizing that there's a human beneath all of this, and the behavior oftentimes looks either disturbing, downright disgusting, and why would anyone appalling, like why would anyone treat anyone that way, or why would there be robberies or burglaries or whatever it may be. But I can really trace it right back to the source and the root of it, as to these people have some real serious problems. So let's look at how we can rehabilitate. Let's look at the pathways of recovery. Let's look at some vocational opportunities. Let's help them reunite with their family through some family-type mediation, whatever they might need on a personal level. So I guess that's where I come from with all of it.
Well, that's like, there's programs out there kind of humanizing the badge. They want people to understand what law enforcement and first responders go through, but sometimes, the badge needs to humanize the human, right? It's to remember those complex stories that are going on well before you show up to the scene. Going back to kind of the ER and EMS world, in a given month, how many times do each of you get thanked?
Kevin gets food delivered to him at work by patients.
That's one patient consistently.
How many times do you have to save this person?
Right?
Once.
And
That she wasn't doing well, and the docs told her, if they hadn't done this, things could have gone a very different way. So she probably comes twice a week with cookies, soup, brownies, chili.
And just it's so sweet. And he's like, you don't have to bring me food. And she's like, but you saved
Tony's
my
frozen
life.
Pizza.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, frozen pizzas. I mean, like whatever she has in her freezer, and I think it's the cutest story.
Yeah,
I think people genuinely thank you. Like when they see what you do. Like they thank you, and like when they're there with a family member, and they say when it's a disaster, or when something's going wrong down the hallway, and like when security's there, and 5 cops are there, and the fire department's there, and when there's a code going on. Most people have that sense of, oh geez, you know what I mean? But there's a lot of people that literally see you doing CPR, and then they're complaining because their mother doesn't have a pillow, and you're like.
Yeah. Overall, I'd say it's. I hate to say it, but it's pretty rare for us to get. Most of the time, you drop the people off, and they're like, "Oh, okay, sign. What do I have to sign? Okay."
Now I'm going to get a bail.
Yeah. If it wasn't rare, organizations like Code Gratitude wouldn't need to exist. But there is that piece. I can see how that would happen, because it's almost like you're a necessary part to get somebody on with their life. And once they're on with their life, they don't want to look back on it.
Right.
And it is important, I think, that we all recognize as humans that we should be going back to people that helped us along the way. And that's something that Caitlin actually has pointed out to me recently, and I think it's valuable. I do want to shift gears a little bit, because we talk a lot here on addiction, and I think it's an important nuance that we bring out. Your worlds related to overdose, in particular, are vastly different, related to one piece, and that is you're probably going to go back to the same house multiple times on Narcan, have people AMA, and they may have already been visited by you multiple times before they actually make it to the emergency department, is a general assumption I've made, but I've heard from other ED settings. I'm wondering if that's the case here with what you see. What do you see differently about overdose, and how you both deal with those things?
I feel we get a lot of I feel we have a lot of the same repeaters. I can name one individual that it was I think it was 3 times in 2 weeks that his same friend brought him in, and you're kind of like, okay, get it together, and this was before the Flacker days, when people would come in, which I think more of the help and to let people know what's out there. Like, I don't know all the things that are out there, just listening to what you're speaking about, what little bit I knew about that, and I'm like, this is great. Maybe these are things that we should advertise more, what I mean? Even to have a sign up that says, hey, did you know in Canandaigua, this is what we have available to people. These are things that are, resources, because even if family members come in that are dealing with the same person time and time and time again, that they have options too for help. But it's hard, you know what I mean? Either they want help or they don't, I feel. And I feel a lot of times, when they're at that low, they're not caring. They just want to get the hell out of there.
What I find interesting about that is specific to this emergency department are statistically, if the ones that come in with drug overdose that actually do meet with me or another peer, about 70% of them get into treatment.
Awesome.
Whereas the alcohol, it's around 62%. And I think that's where the frustration comes, is you and I can list off a name of 20 people probably that go in there all the time.
Weekly, daily.
So how do you maintain? So we've already talked about the idea, okay, you've had a very serious case and then you got somebody with a toothache next door and you've got to give them the same level of care. How do you maintain that sense when you've got somebody that by all appearances would be, so to speak, doing it to themselves?
Right.
You know, how do you maintain that? You know, keep your mindset, refresh yourself for this case, even though you've seen that person probably 3 times that week already.
I would say that it's hard because you see the same, you know what I mean? Like you say, you see the same people, they offer them the same services, you know, and they'll be like, oh, I was good for 2 months. And then, you know, like they relapse. And after like the 20th, 25th time, it's like, do you keep spending money and trying to help, you know what I mean? Like, do you keep helping? Like they know, like it's the same routine. Yeah. Like it's hard because you don't feel that they, you know, they don't want to get better. Right. So,
yeah, you try to cheerlead as much as you can, but like anybody else, eventually, you know, you get to the point where you're like, okay, what's going on this time? All right. And, you know, not that you're apathetic towards it, but, you know, it just becomes humdrum every day. You're like, okay, what are we doing today?
Yeah,
you know, insert name of, you know, whatever repeat customer.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, we have people. How many times have my buddies come in? You know, you got your buddies in 6 or
your
something.
Your buddies here.
Yeah. You know, so we have my buddies all the time in there when I come in there. But, you know, the thing is that why Caitlin and I do what we do is because there is that one moment when their eyes open up, and in that moment we have to be all in already. And so that's where the value, I think, of always being present is, because there is that one. Now, statistically, if I sat here and I was being elected for office based on the success rate of treatment overall, I'd never get elected for office based on that platform, because, you know, we're at about a 90% failure rate. You're not going to get an airplane that fails 90% of the time.
Right.
You're not going to get, you know, so.
But you got 10%.
Yeah, there's a 10%, 5% are getting better, and 5% are vacillating. That 5% is really why we do what we do. That's almost 1.5 million people right now. That's a lot of people, and they are all ready in one moment. I mean, Caitlin and I, our story, had a moment that our eyes lit up, and we said, okay, I'm going to do this. So I'm just curious, you know, in those, it seems like you guys reset the best you possibly can on that. How do you do this with the EMT role when you're out there, or EMS role when you're going to the same houses? I mean, what is your process for dealing? How do you coach your team to manage that?
There's really not anything official on it. Really, it's every provider is different. I mean, it's very much like in the ED, where you could come in and it depends which doc you get, what kind of approach they're going to have to you. You might get a doctor who comes in as more, you know, like the hold your hand and, okay, this will be all right, we'll get through it. Or you may get the one that's, you know, okay, what, very, you know, to the point, direct. What are you here for? What are you doing in this?
What do you want?
I try to, yeah, what do you want? I try to tell people to keep it professional, but still empathetic to them. You know, you just try to do the best you can. And unfortunately, like you said, with all the other incidents, what happened with your day leading into that can, you know, dramatically impact how that interaction with that specific patient can go. Right. If it's your first thing out of the gate, then great. Yeah, yeah. Be nice. Be a good
just
person.
Be nice.
The big thing I tell everybody, and I say this regularly to the point that I'm sure everyone's sick of it at work, is just do the right thing. Even if it's against policy, if you did it for the right reason because it was the right thing to do, no one's going to come down on you for it. You'll never be wrong if you always just do the right thing.
That's important. Now, there are still people trying to get into your industry. There are still people that, surprisingly, people are still aspiring to be nurses and EMS workers and things like that.
You need them.
What advice are you giving back into the incoming troops? I mean, is there anything from what you've learned so far? Any cautionary tale?
Oh, yes.
That wouldn't scare them away.
I know, right? And it's hard, but you got to do what you love, and you got to not let it make you angry and bitter. You know what I mean? Like, so it's a very hard industry, and it depends. Like, sometimes you just need to change a venue, whether it's, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to be a detective anymore. I want to go work in booking, and that's, you know what I mean? That's what I want to do. Or I can't do ER anymore. I want to go to mother baby and deliver babies. Like, it's, you know, people have mindsets of why they do the type of jobs that they do. Like, I could never be an inpatient nurse. I could never work, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like, I was born to work in an ER. Like, that's just my personality. And like, some people, you just have to not let it harden you. You got to find the part that you love to do. I mean, there's so many opportunities within nursing that you can do. I mean, you can teach. You can be professors. I went to a magnet conference last year in Orlando, and there was 10,000 nurses. And it was all about, advancing nursing practice and, going on for education and, empowering nurses and what can you do to make it better. Like, there's so much to do and so much, like, we need nurses everywhere. We'll always need nurses no matter what they need. So it's, love what you do, be happy, and don't let it get you down.
Is Magnet just for ED? Because
nope, it's a hospital-wide thing, and it's nurse-driven, and it's all about, nurse protocols and nurses, it's standing up for nurses. A lot of doctors don't even know what it is. Yeah. And a lot of people don't even know what it is. But it's just, it's empowering for nurses, and it's a very good thing to have. And there's not a lot of hospitals in America that have I think there's like maybe a little over 5,000 hospitals in worldwide that are Magnet certified. And Thompson would be one of them.
That's awesome. Because I was aware of Magnet because I know that like the Association of Operating Room Nurses has their own big organization. Yep. And I just didn't know if that was specialty specific. So I know there's a lot of effort behind it.
It's a hospital-wide thing.
That's awesome.
Strong is. Rochester General is.
Nice.
It's great.
Is there anything like that in the EMS side?
No. There's no accreditation. Well, there's some, but it's there's like CAMS and different other accrediting agencies that say, oh, you have these different, you focus on this in education, you focus on this as far as provider experience level and training levels, competencies, and things like that.
Gotcha.
But just as something comparable to Magnet, no, there's nothing that even comes close. Right. Unfortunately.
So next steps for you guys. I mean, you're going to Magnet. You're going to be a professor down there?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Running for the board?
I'm good right where I'm at. Like, and some people, some people choose, like, to further, to go on to the nurse practitioner thing, to go further. Like, it all depends. Like, the Magnet thing was great. When I won the Nurse of the Year, that was my gift that I got to go, it was amazing. Like, it really was amazing to see. Yeah. So... But yay, nurses.
I still owe you for that Nurse of the Year. I haven't yet to find a Burger King crown.
I could just bring my tiara from my house.
She definitely took that diva role with that one.
Oh, yeah. Nurse of the Millennium.
Right? Well, can't help it if people like me.
Yeah, for the audience's sake, there's these chairs. They have like an IV bag thing on them. And I was sitting in that like it was my throne one time when you came back walking through because I was going to be king of this place if you were going to be queen.
You're like, we got this.
Yeah. But so, how does it work for your relationship? I mean, you guys, this is a high stress job. How you guys manage that? I mean, other than we've talked about the understanding, it's one of the things I thought was kind of cool. Just because, honestly, Kevin, the way she talks about you is awesome. It really is. That's beautiful.
He's one of the smartest paramedics I've ever met. And then when he took over the job as the chief, like he's like, God, I don't know. And I'm like, you're going to do great. And like just all the stuff he comes out, like he's smart, like, and he just, now he has a chance to put that all to use. And being the boss, you do a great job. Your staff likes you. The board of directors likes you, which is saying a lot. You've done well where you've done, when you finally reach your peak of what you want to do, he went, you thought about getting out of EMS. Like, you're like, what, like, this is a lot. I don't want to do this. And I'm like, what if you did more and applied for a bigger job? And you got it. And now look. And you love it.
Not to put your job at risk, right? You love it?
Yeah, no, I do. She's right. I had probably one of the worst years a provider could have the last year that I was on the road. And I was totally like, that something else. I'm done with this. I can't do this anymore. We have people in the industry called black clouds where, they're here. It is going to go bad today, no matter what. You get sent for something mundane, and then next thing you know, it's the most critical patient you've had year to date until the next one comes along. So at the end of that, I was just ready for a change, and fortunately that opportunity came along, and I had a lot of encouragement from this one to be like, do it, you'll do fine. And I don't know what I'm doing. Just shut up and do it. You'll do it. Yeah. Okay.
That's why she's a good nurse, too.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
Just shut up and do it.
Right. And part of what I think makes us get along so well is that, like you said when you walked in, so opposite. But I think where we're opposite, it complements each other very well in that, where I might be a big softy, someone else might be, a little more stern and able to kind of push things the way they need to go, and when someone else is going a little
someone else in
wild,
the
maybe someone else to bring them down to earth and say, okay, now.
I'm very, this is how it is. This is the way that it is. And he's like, well, what about this? And what if we did this? I'm like, that's not, you do it this way. This is how you do it. And he's like, okay.
Yeah.
But not that you're not open to new things, but like you just, like I'm very real. Like this is how it is. This is how it's going to be. Like this is what we do.
Yeah.
And sometimes
it can be very what if, and
what if
maybe this,
maybe
or
no,
what about that?
And you're like, no, because this isn't going to happen. This is how it's going to be. Okay.
Yeah.
And
then you do it 3 or 4 times. She goes, maybe.
Maybe.
Maybe is a victory.
It's kind of funny.
We'll see.
The only indication I have with you, Sarah, that anything's changed in your day at all, because you're an authentic person. I mean, what we're seeing here is what I see every single day. The only time I can see things change is how you pick up the phone. How you answer the phone.
Not how she puts it down?
No, how you answer the phone changes the game. Like, oh boy, I'm staying away from her for a
Right?
I feel bad for the lab.
Right? Well, sometimes at lab, I don't know. If I could change something in my job, it would be communication with the lab. That's one thing I would do.
Nice. Well, you guys got anything coming up you want to announce or anything? Anything going on? You do any public events or?
Not that I know of.
Nothing big coming up.
No.
But if people want to volunteer for EMS, we're always looking for new people.
Okay.
And it's not just a local thing. I mean, nationally, volunteerism is definitely in decline across the board, and that includes fire departments, ambulance, even volunteer positions. I'm sure at the hospital aren't even filled as much as they used to be.
Right.
But if people are looking to get into an industry or even just to see what it's all about, we offer ride-alongs. People can come just take a shift and kind of see how it is on the other side of the
should they
other
just go
side
to
of the
their
wheel. Call up your local ambulance. Just Google it. You'll find whatever you need and make contact and see what they can do.
Awesome. Well, man, we loved having you here. Brian, you want to help us wrap up here? We're kind of at a point.
Yeah, well, first of all, I thank you both for what you do. You really are unsung heroes. And going back to this kind of idea of kind of evaluating, I wish, Sarah, we could take a snapshot of Nurse of the Year every year and profile them and find a way to pour some of that into the training programs, just so that the things that you're good at, certainly it's your personality, but it's also this, very, I'm going to get it done, kind of mentality, and merging that in with some empathy, and at the same time having the thick skin to get through the next crazy call. And, but to me, again, that comes back. So I close out my part of this every week by just giving this mantra of learning to appreciate people that, I'm not perfect. Nobody is.
Amen.
I have value. Everybody does. And I feel like, especially for first responders, if we can do a better job of starting over every call, hitting the reset button, and then at the same time trying to help the community understand who it is they're calling for help, who it is when they go to the ED that they're looking to get help from, that these people are also, public servants. They're doing a difficult job, and you have no idea what they dealt with yesterday or last week or last month that you might be similar to. And they're bringing some of that experience, but also some of that baggage into the equation. So thanks again. Great to meet you guys. Hope we can do this again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, so on to me, I just want to say thank you for coming here today and for all that you do as well. I've certainly had my share of experience in hospital setting, on the other side. So I really, really respect you both and thank you very much. From my end, I found that willingness is the answer to every step of the process of healing. Every step of my recovery, the willingness to try something new, to listen to someone else's suggestion, that has literally been the answer. And just know that there are resources available if you need them.
Awesome. Well, thanks, guys. I really appreciate you coming in. It's always fun working with you. It's a pleasure to meet you, Kevin.
Yeah, you too.
I'm sure I'll get yelled at least twice on Sunday and Monday this week. But to our audience, thanks for tuning in to 100 Proof Living, where we believe that change lives change lives.
Thank you for listening to the 100 Proof Living podcast. Please remember to rate and review this show wherever you get podcasts. It really helps. Get more information at 100proofliving.com.